Christine Marie, and I am so grateful for you joining me tonight. We are going to be diving into what is the ideal, because frankly, I have been meditating on this afternoon, and I got to my process of vertical alignment later in the evening. Actually, I was just wrapping it up about 30 minutes ago, and this really, really resonated, this concept of diving into the ideal, because so many of us and so much of the time, we live our lives on autopilot. We live on default behaviors, and we spend so much of our lives living unintentionally. We wake up and we do the same thing every day, and then we wonder why nothing has changed. We wonder why we're still the same person. We wonder why our marriage is never better. We wonder why we hit the midlife or quarter life crisis and we're still unhappy. And so I'm going to talk about the ideal. I was leaning into this tonight in honestly, there's just this kind of frustrated way. I have I was reading the book Choose Your Enemies Wisely by Patrick Bet-David last year, and it really, really honed me in heading into 2024. And so tonight, as I was reading about my ideal, and frankly I was kind of feeling this frustration, this angst over this person that I want to be. And as I was in my vertical alignment and I was just listening, I really felt like I just had this impression of, don't let my ideal become my idol. And why that is so important is because we can live in a state of not being aware, not living with intention whatsoever. That's kind of like one side of the aisle. But then the other side of the aisle is that we're actually so clear and we're so intentional. We're living with so much passion and fervor that we are actually making this future ideal an idol that is taking us out of the present moment, and we're not actually even able to enjoy life itself. And so there's these two extremes that we can be tempted to live in. And what the risk of that is that for both regards, both ends of the spectrum, we're not here in the now. We're not fully present. And yesterday on the Knowing Show, I was speaking with Jason Fladlin, and he gave this concept of effectively living as a third-party observer of your life at specific times, and that can actually help you be more present. And I want to lean into this because in order for us to really first identify and find our ideal and then live accordingly to it, we actually need to talk about why in the first place. We need to talk about the present moment. There's this fine line of identifying the ideal and living for that then it's like, okay, well, how do we live in the present moment? So that's number one. Number two is how do we live for this future ideal and not live in the gap from where we are today versus the future ideal? So number one, how do we live for the future and stay present? How do we identify the gap while still living in the gain? And there's a book by Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan all about living in the gap versus the gain. And the reason why the present moment and living in the gain, both of which are so incredibly important, needs to be addressed when we're talking about the ideal is because apart from that ability to maintain present, like a present sense of being, in addition to the doing that is necessary to achieve the ideal, is because then we're going to be functioning in relationships, in our everyday lives as a human doer rather than a human being. So our ability to stay present is paramount to us being able to even achieve the ideal. Because let's say we achieve these external milestones and we do all the things on our litany of what we aim to achieve by the end of our lives in terms of the ideal external achievements, but we've negated the internal being along the way, the internal ideal. And so in order for us to allow for the coalescing of the internal with the external when it comes to the ideal, we have to be able to identify, again, the what even is it and why do we want that in the first place. So first, addressing the inner ideal. That is something that I was just living as a non-entity for the majority of my life up until my husband left. When I was 28, I had lived as very much so on autopilot, but living in response and in reaction to who everyone wanted me to be. And I think of it as the horizontal. I was looking to the right and to the left. Effectively, my compass was broken. Rather than navigating north and navigating vertical, I was looking east and west and was magnetized to everyone around me. And I was looking to them desperately, like, who do you want me to be? I will be that person. I want to make you happy. And the goal of it was for connection. The goal was to live deeply in relationship, to be known and loved. And isn't that what we all want at the end of the day? That's the ultimate aim and objective for so many of us, is to love and be loved in return, to know and be known in return. And so that was the ultimate core pursuit, but I was doing it in a way that was effectively leaving my inner self behind. I was so focused on the external behaviors, the inner beliefs that would align with those around me, that would be necessary to then be able to live closely in community with those people that I so desperately wanted to be close to. And so I ended up being, a mirror of everyone around me, and really almost like a phantom, so to say, because I was so lacking in an inner grounding and an inner compass and an inner sense of being in the first place. So my doing was mirroring everyone around me with a lack of inner being. So effectively, in order to cultivate this inner sense of being and identify what even is my ideal in the first place for my own inner self, I had to really strip away, almost like taking everything off of the table. And then I could slowly start to add new building blocks back onto the table. But I had to take everything off and just analyze, okay, who do I want to be? And this is actually the third question to the knowing framework. In order for us to understand who we want to be, in order for us to identify our ideal, we have to do the work to go back retroactively and understand how the past shapes the present, in order to then even begin to identify our potential, to then begin to create our ideal. We have to understand how the past holds weight in the mindsets, the core beliefs. I was a mirror of everyone around me, but there were many reasons why, and they really deeply shaped the manner in which I did. So talking about the external doing, my inner being, even though I really didn't know it, I really had to come to grasp with, okay, well, this is who I've been shaped to be. This is how culture, how my external environment growing up really led to me being this person today. And so in that process of understanding, well, who was I? What are the core memories and the core moments that really, really shaped me? And frankly, I landed on six or seven core memories that showed up today in the present in my mindsets, in the way that I manifested in behavior and the way that I lived. So identifying the core 6 or 7 memories and moments in the past, how they shape and show up in mindsets and external manifestations in the present. Only then could I identify, okay, these are actually things I do want to take with me and things that I want to leave behind. These are also the areas for my ideal that I want to add. Because y'all, when we talk about creation, when we talk about creating something new, creating a new ideal, changing, we have to, and we talked about this yesterday in the Knowing Show with Jason Fladlin, absolutely brilliant point that he made. We have to remove. I liken this whole process of coming to know ourselves in my book Knowing to Michelangelo. He was asked, how in the world did you sculpt and create David, this beautiful, beautiful statue? And he said, I chipped away. I removed who David was not until we finally arrived to David himself. And y'all, that is what we fundamentally must do. We must remove all of which is not the ideal in order to then create the ideal and see real change. So we have to effectively know the idea, know the past, see how it shows up in the present, to then create the potential and walk forward in that. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm sure it will only continue in the future, I'm just stripping away and removing a whole bunch that needs to go. Jordan Peterson talks of it as, he refers to it as dead wood, and just allowing for the dead wood to go and being humble enough and courageous enough to let go. And I'm reading David Hawkins' book, Letting Go. I've been reading it for a month and a half now. It's so great. And y'all, so much of it is about the whole process of letting go of what what are those things that are clinging to us, that are holding us back, that are preventing us from being able to walk into the potential? And so much of it is in the past. So there has to be this semblance of understanding, what is the past? How is it showing up here in this present moment? Now I can let it go. I can kind of like do the little hand wipe and then move into the future. But we talked about this at the very beginning. How do we ensure that our doing aligns with our being, so that we're not being human doers, but we're allowing ourselves to really operate as human beings here in the present moment, yet living aware and in alignment of the future? So how do we do that? How do we allow for this very dichotomous, juxtaposing existence of being present, yet living in accordance with this future self in mind? And Joe, I just saw you on Instagram. It's good to see you. Y'all, this is one of the hardest questions. It's one of the hardest things for us to be able to maintain a present state of being and live in the future. And this is where the two kind of blend and come into cohesion, so to say. In the present moment, if we're truly present here and now, and we have done the work to understand the past, and we are fully free from that to be wholly here and now in this moment, now in the present is where creation happens. When we're living in, Dr. Joe Dispenza actually talks about this a lot. Here in the present now is the unknown. When we're living in the past and projecting the past into the future, we are expecting something to happen. We are expecting a certain outcome, and we are looking into the future knowing, so to say, exactly what's going to happen. But it is in the unknown present now that we are able to create something new, because otherwise we're just repeating those old behaviors. We're repeating the life that we lived yesterday. But if we're allowing ourselves to be fully here in the present moment, rather than consciously 5, 10, 15 minutes ahead of time predicting what's going to happen, then we're fundamentally stumping ourselves from creation. Creation happens in the unknown, in the ability to sit in the discomfort of, I don't know what's next. I don't know exactly what the answer is. I've actually let go of a particular outcome, and thus I can create something new. And so when we think about doing that for ourselves, creating our own ideal for our inner being versus creating an ideal for everything we want to do and accomplish in our lives, and we'll get to the doing here in just a moment. The way that I fundamentally and practically did this was allowing for seeing how the past shows up in the present, and then in the removing of it, okay, well, who do I want to be in regards to that very specific thing? So I'll give an example. When I was showing how the past, who was I, shows up in the present. In the past, when I was 3 years old, I was staying at one of my family members' house, and I was contracting Lyme's disease in my knee. No one knew at the time, but my knee was in a lot of pain. And at the time, I was crying, and I was spanked for crying because I guess it was appearing as disobedience or just being ornery. And so I got spanked and disciplined to help kind of curb that. But what my physical body observed and learned at the time was effectively that when I cry, when I show any kind of negative emotion, when I'm physically in pain, I will basically get more physical punishment. I'll absorb more physical pain by way of spanking, and also emotional pain through disconnection from my caregiver. And so that past memory, that past moment showed up in the present by way of, let me not be vulnerable when I'm in physical or emotional pain, because then I'm going to experience disconnection from those I love. And that was reinforced in my marriage. Anytime that I had a problem, I would experience disconnection from my partner at the time. And so in realizing that, now I come face to face with these two options of, am I going to let that old behavior, an old program go? Am I going to actively reprogram that? And then two, what am I going to put in its stead? How do I want to operate in lieu of this realization? So this is why we have to understand the past and how it shows up in the present to then be able to create something new. So yes, it is the process of letting go, doing away with the old, but then also it's time to create something. It's time to create something new. And so in this time and in this process, I've gone through and identified those 6 or 7 core aspects, core moments in the past, understanding how they show up in the mindsets today in the present moment, how they manifest. And I've effectively come up with 7 or 8 different new manners of my own inner ideal. So when I talk about coming into vertical alignment, bringing my mindsets, behaviors, beliefs under the hierarchy of my ideal, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the inner ideal that you and I have created in response to old programs that we know cognitively, emotionally, that should no longer be there. And we want to move away from those old programs. And then what also helps with this process of moving away from these old programs and moving towards a new target is that, and actually I just want to take a quick pause. My therapist said this 4 years ago, which was so helpful. I was talking with him while I was still, my husband and I were in the midst of figuring out if he would stay married or not. And I realized, I was like, man, we ended up having the same marriage as both of our parents. And we were so committed to not doing that. How in the dickens did this happen? And he was like, Christene, if you don't set a new target, you're going to end up doing a 360 rather than a lateral 180. So our ideal, it must be created and named and identified, and we need to outline the KPIs for what indicates success are on our way to this new ideal, because otherwise we're going to end up doing a 360 because those patterns and those programs are so deeply embedded in us. They're embedded in our subconscious. They're embedded in our body. Bessel van der Kolk wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Our physical body traps memories and holds on to it until we've actually let it go and physically moved through it. And this book by this other book talks about the process of effectively, like animals do, moving through the trauma cycle through emotional release. And that is one modality that allows for us to let go of the old past programs and allows for us to be able to move freely into the present now and create something new. And with this process, it is so important that we identify that target so that we can reach and have a new aim. And what I was going to say previous is that we have to let people know. We have to let those people closest to us know that we are actively reprogramming, because we're going to be changing the way and manner in which we show up in relationships. And we're probably going to catch a lot of people off guard. We are creating a new ecosystem for our own selves. We're creating a new environment, a new atmosphere that we're asking people to engage with us in community and connection, but we're changing the rules. And y'all, this is so important. I actually experienced this very keenly with my parents right out of the beginning, or out of the gate, right in the beginning of my journey of knowing was, I told them, I was like, y'all, I am actively changing myself. I'm reprogramming my brain. I'm changing the way I show up. But I had to warn them because my MO had been codependency for years. I've told my sisters this. Everyone in my family knows it at this point. But early on, I had to let people know I'm trying to actively move away from this former way of living. But I had to know the former way of living, know the new target, understand what the new target entails in terms of, yes, the beliefs, the mindset shifts and alterations thereof, but also the behaviors. What are the actual behaviors that align? So that's the doing. So the internal inner being is the belief, the principles, let's say, and then the external doing is the practices and the behaviors. So we've got beliefs and behaviors, principles and practices. Each one of those is so incredibly important to identify and know so that we can live in, this is where the present meets the future. Because if we know our future ideal, we're not there yet, but if we have done the work to know it, then we can start creating it. We cannot create that which we do not know. And so in this beautiful dichotomy of living in the present, being so here and now, yet having full awareness of the future, we can actively create because we've got our target in mind and we can be so here in the present moment. And then that's where what Jason Fladland said yesterday, sometimes you have to actually operate as a third party perspective and observer of your life in order to then be able to step in and say, oh, I wasn't in alignment right there. Let me re-alter that behavior to align with this new belief that I have. And the more that we actually get those closest to us in agreement to support us and help us change, y'all, this is so important. I was on the phone with a client yesterday, and I love it when conversations with clients turn into just getting real and getting personal. And so he was sharing about some very real challenges he's having in his marriage. And we were talking about how he's actually choosing, he's outlined a new ideal, but his wife is actually feeling really threatened by that. And what's so important in the communication of new beliefs, new principles, we have to share with those closest to us how the practices and behaviors of the external is going to impact them, because there's going to be a real change, y'all. It's going to be so uncomfortable for people who have learned how to engage with us in our own unhealth as we seek to change and move into healthier patterns and ways of living and existing. They're actually going to suffer some consequences, because that means we're going to have some boundaries. Boundaries often are coalescing those new behaviors predicated on the new belief. But then also there's going to be just uncertainty, because, well, what is this really going to look like? There's going to be discomfort in the unknown. The unknown is where creation lies, because we're choosing and changing and allowing for something new. But then there's also the uncertainty of, well, what's actually going to happen? So for not only ourselves, we are going to experience this, but also our partners and our families and even our colleagues, our employees, potentially even our customers. As we seek to change and allow for the inner ideal to translate into our external and outer ideal, the uncertainty of what that actually is going to look like, because it is unknown, our primal 4Fs, our primal brain starts activating. And those 4Fs are fear, flight, fawn, or freeze. We're going to experience that ourselves, but then also everyone around us is too, because it's all unknown, it's all uncertain. And the brain freaks out when we change our behaviors, when we change our patterns, when something is being reprogrammed, it is not happy. And so while we do this for ourselves, we have to keep so keenly in mind those around us, because we love them. And frankly, they'll benefit, but probably not yet. This is like putting in the reps. It's like the stretching of the muscle. It's the working out. It's the expansion. It's the growth period. It's almost like the labor pains. We're giving birth to something new. And there's death. There's death along the way. So of course death is uncomfortable. Of course death is painful. New birth and new life is painful in the process of the delivery of it. And so we have to be prepared ourselves to undergo the discomfort and the change necessary, but we have to let people know along with us, guys, will you come alongside me in my journey? Will you come along? Hey, do you want to change too? We can invite them to change themselves, but if we're inviting them into our arena, to the process of knowing and thus creating, we have to have so much compassion, not just for ourselves, but also for those around us. Because this is a hard, painful time. And in regards to kind of that primal brain, the 4Fs activating, freeze, fight, fawn, or flight. Each one of those, we have the opportunity. David Goggins, U.S. Navy SEAL, talks about this whole process of effectively our brain at 40%, when we're at 40% capacity of our own physical cognitive capacity, at 40% of it being used up, our primal brain kicks in, because it wants to save the last 60% for going and having to literally save our lives. That's our survival instincts kicking in. So what is amazing and kind of mind-blowing still for me to this day is that when my primal brain kicks into gear, I still have 60% left to go. I still have way more. I'm not even 50% there. I'm not even halfway. And my primal brain is telling me, stop, this is uncomfortable, get out, save yourself. And it's activating one of these 4 core survival mechanisms as a response to protect us and keep us safe from any kind of discomfort. So we have to, this is why compassion is so necessary, because beating ourselves into submission is not going to ever allow for that evolve. It's the I'm trying to think of the best way to describe what I'm kind of seeing right now. It's almost like the expansion and contraction of, oh, that's it. Okay. So when a woman is in labor, the best advice that she can be given is to relax and to allow for her muscles to not be tense and tight. Otherwise, this process of giving birth and new life being created is actually going to be that much more resistant, and there's going to be that much more for her to fight against. So if we are trying to beat our primal brain into submission, it's actually tightening up and getting more upset, and it's survival. The fear that's causing these 4Fs to activate is getting more and more activated, rather than allowing for compassion and the reminder that actually, no, we're safe. It's okay. There's just a new person at the driver's seat. Our new ideal self is the one driving, not our old programs, our old patterns, our old ways of being. It's no longer at the helm of the ship. And so compassion together with love and this ability to express gentleness as we allow for this new birthing process of a new self and a new life and a new program, that allows for us to relax into it. And that's why breath work is actually really, really important. Women are guided in terms of breathing exercises and techniques to calm themselves. And even David Goggins talks about this too. He talks about the 1 second rule. He talks about when your primal instinct kicks in, just allowing for 1 second at a time. Because if we're looking at how am I going to make this, he gives the analogy of being in wasn't boot camp, but something like that for U.S. Navy SEALs. It's a many days. And so he said that in the first hour, they're all laying in the Pacific Ocean, and they're effectively being waterboarded for hours. And he said that the primal brain kicks in, the survival instincts kick in. And what the survival primal brain does is that it's, how are we going to make this for 300 hours of boot camp, let's say? How am I going to make this that long? And what he says is focus on the present. Focus on 1 second at a time. 1 second. I just made it. I can make it again. I'm doing it. Getting into the rhythmic breathing and process of staying in the here and now, allowing our bodies to relax and training our body. That's why we need a new target. We can't just say, oh, I'm not going to have that primal brain activated, but rather now we have a new target of, let me breathe through this process of my chest tightening, my gut activating, my body tensing. The breath work actually allows our body and our primal energy to actually be let go and released. And then that's what allows us to withstand the discomfort of real change. So all of these different aspects of aligning our inner ideal, aligning our external behavior with our kind of external ideal, all of that, when I say we need to bring ourselves into alignment under the hierarchy of our ideal, that is what I mean. But we have to clearly articulate, delineate, define what the internal ideal in terms of our being and the external ideal in terms of our doing, what that is in terms of, for the internal, the beliefs, the principles, for the external, the behaviors and the practices. And then what are the supporting KPIs? What are the key performance indicators in both regards that allow for us to know if we're heading in the right direction, if we're actually on track? Otherwise, if we don't set that new target, we're just simply going to be doing a 360 rather than a lateral 180, a real change for hitting that new target, heading for something new. But the only way we can do that is by knowing the past, how it shows up and manifests in the present, in order to then create something new. We have to know the old to then create the target. And then in the activation of it, we have to let people in. We have to tell them, ask them, invite them to be a part of us and our journey. And heck, maybe they'll be so inspired that they'll try to change too. Like, wouldn't that be amazing? I was talking to a couple the other day, and both of them were really, really committed to this process of both knowing and creating. And in that process, it's creating something new. It's giving birth to something new while the old is passing. The new is becoming. But in that process, we have to experience and afford ourselves the compassion, the gentleness, and the love necessary. Otherwise, our survival mechanisms and our survival instincts are going to kick in and fundamentally prevent us from being able to experience the change that's necessary for creation to be born.